Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni moli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Ghana, Himalaya, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is the internationally acclaimed storyteller Noa Baum. She is here to celebrate her brand new picture book, How the Birds Became Friends. Before we invite Noa into the studio, we would love to invite you to connect with us on social media. Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram, at Jedley Magic on Twitter. We also have a great Pinterest page. We want you to connect with us so you can be up to date with everything that's going on with the podcast. That's also the best way to enter our book giveaways. We are giving away so many books to families, classrooms, daycare centers. We would love for you to win some books from us. So when you see our book giveaway announcements on the social media, all you need to do to enter is to follow the instructions in the post, like, share. We would also love it if you could go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, sign up for our free newsletter. That's a great way to enter the contest as well. Joining us right now from Silver Spring in Maryland, I'm really, really excited about our guest today. She's the author of How the Birds Became Friends, which has just been released today by our friends at Familias. Please welcome to the show, author and world-renowned storyteller Noa Baum. Noa, welcome to the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, Jed.
Why don't we begin by, well, you know what? You made the offer. Why don't we begin with you reading or telling the first part of How the Birds Became Friends?
Oh, sure. Thank you. Well, long ago, when the world was very young, the birds did not get along. Imagine, they were always fighting about who was better. If Peacock met Robin, he'd shout, "Out of the way! I am a much better bird than you." But Robin would jab right back, "I'm a much better bird than you." And they would charge at each other, beaks pecking, feathers flying, squawks and screeches everywhere. Well, it wasn't just Peacock and Robin. Owl, magpie, pigeon and starling, swallow, woodpecker, blue jay and parakeet, sparrow, crow, goose and falcon, each screeching louder than the other. "I'm a better bird than you, I'm a better bird than you, I'm a better bird than you." They were always fighting, beaks pecking, feathers flying, squawks and screeches everywhere. The world was a very noisy place. But one day, one shy little bird, quail, was so tired of all the beaks pecking, feathers flying, squawks and screeches everywhere. She wanted to stop the fighting. But how?
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Parents, if you're listening to this, I don't want you to be discouraged. No, I don't want you to be sitting there thinking, I could never read a story like that. And probably right, but you can add life to this story. And this is it sounds like a beautiful story that would be so much fun to read with our kids.
Well, I actually beg to differ. I think anyone can read in any way that they want, and it will be perfect. Because what is so important is for your kids to be connected to your voice. And whatever you do with your voice, it doesn't matter, is going to be fabulous, because it's the voice, it's the human voice that creates deep, intimate connections. And so, yes, I'm very dramatic because that's what I like to do, and that's my background, and I like to have fun like that. And you can do it. You can have fun and make voices, but you don't have to. You really don't have to. What's important is that you enjoy it. And if you enjoy it and you're reading with, your sense of enjoyment, it will come through your voice. What's important is that you love reading. And what's important is that you love your child. And that is going to come through your voice. And that's what's important.
I love that connection with our voice and forgetting, as you're reading, forgetting about comparing yourself to Noah or to anybody else. Just get in your mind that you are here with this person that you adore and you're doing something that you both absolutely love. And that is going to elevate that experience to something that is quite magical and heavenly.
Yes, absolutely. I so agree with that. And even if you just make up stories, if you just tell stories about your life and you just make up stories, I have a little story about that. Can I share
Absolutely, yeah.
So when my children were little, I'm the storyteller, so I was relegated to telling stories. But I really wanted my husband to do more than just give the bath. I really wanted him to not, I didn't want my kids to just have a dad that's always, in the lab, always at work, and they'll, meet him when they're teenagers. I really wanted them to bond. And so I devised a plan. I left the house 2 nights a week. I went to teach one night. I went to a yoga class one night. And he said, but I can't tell stories. And I said, well, just make them up. Because my kids like me to make up stories. And he said, but I can't do that. You're the storyteller. I said, well, just tell them stories about your childhood. And he said, but I don't remember anything about my childhood. And I said, well, make it up. And he did. And my kids are now 28 and 30. And I can tell you unequivocally that the stories they remember most in their lives are the stories that their father made up for them. They remember every single detail. And they have a relationship with him that is absolutely priceless. Nothing in the world, no money, no status, nothing can buy this kind of bond. And it's the human voice, and it's that connection, and it's that intimacy that they had with their father, sitting in the dark, imagining whatever he was telling them. So whether you read or tell a story, really what's important is your presence. Your presence and your voice is what creates the bond.
Yeah. That is so important. I'm so happy that you shared that with us because I've mentioned on the show a couple of times, my wife is a teacher. She's been teaching for 33 years in the Boston Public Schools, and one of her best friends is an administrator. And I sat down with him one day and I said, how can I use my podcast to motivate parents to read more with their kids? Because there is such a disparity. And they both turned and they said there are so many of the parents of our students who can't read, or they can't read in English. And that's true. And I'm happy that you're sharing with them that they can still have this bond that we celebrate here in the Reading with Your Kids podcast by telling stories of their childhood, of their loved ones who've gone on before us to make up stories.
Right.
And it's that.
And I do a lot of workshops with parents, and a lot of people say, but I had terrible, painful things in my childhood. I don't want to tell my children about that. There's sad things that happen to you. There's traumatic things that have happened to you. And parents don't want to share that with their children, especially not the young children. And what I say is that, you don't have to share what is traumatic and what is painful, but you can take what has been painful and share the nice things around it. And you can make things up. It's okay to make things up. My husband did not have a lot of memories from his childhood, but he made up a story about how, the underwear just come out of the drawer and start dancing. And his mother comes into the room and says, "What is this mess? Why are the clothes all over the floor? Why is the underwear on the couch?" And of course the kids shriek and laugh every time he says the word underwear, because they're, 3 and 5, and this is what they love. And he just makes this whole story up about how, he says, "Well, I don't know, it's just the drawer opens up and the magic underwear jump out." And that was the story. My 30-year-old remembers that story word by word. They loved it. They loved it. They asked for it again and again and again and again and again and again.
That's beautiful.
So it doesn't matter. You can allow yourself in that moment with your child to let go of the judgment. Nobody's looking at you. Nobody is judging you. Just let all that go and be in that moment and make things up. I used to be so tired at the end of the day, and my kids, after you read them, several books, they still wanted a story in the dark. And I'm just so tired and my mind is blank, and I'm like, I can't make up anything that is of value and has a good moral and has a good plot, And so I just started by saying, well, how about we tell a story together? Once upon a time there was, and my son says, a dragon. Okay. And he set out to find and we make up a story together, and they loved it. They loved it.
That's beautiful. Such great advice. You spoke about parents not wanting to share the traumatic things that happened to them in their childhood. How the birds became friends is ultimately a story of peace.
Yes.
You grew up in Jerusalem, and you were surrounded by violence and fear. How did we get to, that background to now that you're working so hard to bring peace to the world?
Well, as a child, my first war was when I was 8 years old. So I grew up, yes, with a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, like existential fear. And like all children, I prayed for peace. Every year we wish each other a peaceful new year, pray for peace, hope for peace, write poems about peace and stories about peace and songs about peace. And I thought it was a very unique thing that we Israeli Jewish children, this is what we do, because our life is like it is with all the wars. And then when I grew up, I realized, well, it's not just Jewish Israeli kids. It's everybody. And when I became a storyteller, I really discovered that people since the beginning of time, in every single culture, in every single spiritual tradition, have been telling stories about peace and about reminding us what is needed for peace. What do we as humans can do for peace? And I started collecting those stories. And one of those was this wonderful folktale from Indonesia, from Myanmar, what used to be called Burma. And I just absolutely loved it from the moment I heard it, and I started telling it and telling it and telling it. And then, we decided to make it into a picture book with my publisher, because I published a book for adults, which is my memoir about peace and using storytelling for peace. And so we wanted to do something for children. And, I'm really, really excited about this book. It's illustrated by a phenomenal artist and scientist, Zev Labinger, who also happens to be a friend of mine. And we made the opposite trips. I grew up in Israel and ended up in the United States. He grew up in the United States and ended up in Israel. And it's a really special story that reminds us that even if we're small and even if we feel very helpless and insignificant, there are things that we could do that make a difference. And just by taking the first step, just by going against the grain, just by being kind, we can change we can change things. And it starts by just changing one relationship, and then that has a ripple effect.
Such a great and empowering message that we can share with our kids. To let a little 3 or 4, 5, 6-year-old kid know that they can start the change that can lead to a more peaceful world.
Yes, one small act, even one small act can change the world, because that's what happens in the story. Quail brings peace into the world just by, being really, really brave. And being brave doesn't mean that you have to go slay a dragon. Being brave means that you're scared and you're confused and you're not sure what to do, but you try it anyway. And you just do it. And all she did was, well, I don't want to give it away, of course, but she did something pretty simple that every child can do.
Yeah. Hey, you shared with us that How the Birds Became Friends was a traditional story from Myanmar. Was it difficult taking this traditional oral story and turning it into a written children's picture book?
Yes, because as a spoken word artist, I tell the story, I get into it, and I use my voice, and I use my face, and I use my gestures, and I use my body to tell the story. And all of a sudden, I don't have all those tools, but what I have is words, and they have to be less than the words that I use in person. And I have to transfer a lot of the things that I do in person to the artist that illustrates and makes these beautiful pictures, so that the pictures help tell the story. So a lot of the expressions that I would use when I tell the story are now in the picture itself, in the painting. So I was really lucky that Zev and I worked very closely together, and he knows how I tell the story, and he really understands the story from its inside. And so he was able, to make pictures that are scientifically accurate, because he's a bird scientist, and still capture the humanity and the human expressions and the emotions that the story tells. So I feel very fortunate.
It's such a wonderful thing that you were able to work with a friend to create these illustrations. I've actually had here on the podcast an author and illustrator met for the very first time on the podcast. It was really touching. They had just communicated through a publisher for a couple of years, and then they came together. It's very unusual that you have had a chance to work with a friend and somebody that you were very familiar with.
Yes, absolutely. Very, very, very unique. And to the credit of the wonderful publishing house Familius, that they were open to that. They were looking for an illustrator, and I suggested him, and they embraced it. And so I was very, very fortunate.
We talked early on about just that we don't have to be professional storytellers, that it's that connection, that when your child hears your voice and knows that you are present and understands that you have put everything else away and you're just focused in on your child, that's where that connection, that's where that bond is built. We've been telling stories as human beings far longer than we've been publishing stories, and so oral stories are a lot older than books. Can you talk a little bit about why you think it's important to keep those traditional stories, like how the birds became friends, keep those stories that are thousands of years old alive today?
Well, they have survived thousands and thousands and thousands of years because they're good. So there's a reason why they have survived. And they have survived because they speak to basic, universal human values with the specific culture and specific colors of each culture, right? And specific customs and conventions of each culture, yes? But the thing that draws me to these ancient stories is that they really are like this secret map to the soul. They're like this map to who we really are, not to our ideas, not to our behavior, just on the outside, but who we really are, who our needs are, how we operate on the inside, and what it takes to be a good person on this earth. And so some of these traditional stories will tell you what it means to be a good person by giving you stories about those that forgot, right? All the tricksters and the fools and the numbskulls. And some of them are stories that tell you, that remind you by the acts of the main characters and the heroes. And I think these stories are really powerful, and the way they survived is because they are powerful. And we have a lot to learn from them. Sadly, a lot of them, by the time they were written down, they've lost a lot of the richness. Many of the stories, for example, the Brothers Grimm stories that were written down, they were never intended for children necessarily. And they were written down with a very specific Western perspective that took away a lot of the original, the way they were actually told in the beginning. But still, if you really, really listen deeply to what's underneath the words, if you really start thinking about stories as representatives of who we are and the different energies that make up who we are, the different parts of who we are, the different archetypes of who we have within each and every one of us, as Jung would say, Carl Jung, then you find that these stories have a lot to teach us. And for me personally, especially in difficult times, and let's not beat around the bush, we've been going through some very difficult times in the last few years, and then with this pandemic, when nothing else makes sense in the world, these stories offer a lot of comfort for me. They remind me that humans are capable. They help me remember what it means to be courageous. They help me remember what I need to do to overcome my fears. So I never look at them as just for children, but of course when I tell them to children, I adapt them in a certain way that will make it much more communicative to the understanding and the emotional needs of a child.
Yeah. There is so much wisdom for everyone in so many children's books. And, it's too bad that we're of a mindset, if we see pictures in a book, we automatically just kind of discredit it. And it's for kids and there's nothing in there for me. And there are so many books, so many stories that have some great wisdom. And if we'd only open up our ears and listen to them, maybe we'd make some progress in this world.
I have to tell you just one tiny little story.
Sure.
When my children were little, the book, We're Going on a Bear Hunt. Can't go over it, can't go under it, can't go around it, must go through it. We're going on a bear. So this was a favorite book. It's a picture book of my children, and both me and my husband read it to them when they were little. And it became like a central metaphor in our house, in our life. And again, my children are adults now. We still, when we encounter something difficult emotionally or in the world, we look at each other. Can't go over it. Can't go under it. Can't go around it. You gotta go through it. And it has been like this mantra in our family, and it comes from a children's picture book.
Yeah. Great wisdom. There's so much that I wanted to speak to you about. We're going to save it for the next time you come back on the show because I'm really looking forward to that. In the meantime, Noa, where can folks go to find out more about how the birds became friends and also find out more about your memoir?
Familius is the publisher of both of my books, and so you can find them there. My memoir, A Land Twice Promised, An Israeli Woman's Quest for Peace, is also on Audible, so you can also find it there, narrated by me.
Well, yeah, we definitely want to encourage everybody to check out the Familius website. It'll be in our show notes. And, of course, you can also support your local independent bookstore. Just give them a call that, they might not have When the Birds Became Friends on the shelves right now. But if you give them a call, they can get it there almost instantaneously. Yeah. We've had a wonderful time speaking to the author of When the Birds Became Friends and somebody who is celebrating a birthday tomorrow. So happy birthday. Our guest has been Noa Baum. Noa, thank you so much for being part of our show.
Thank you so much, Jed. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We'll be kicking off Hispanic Heritage Month with our guest, Carla Arenas Valente. She'll be celebrating Loteria. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. If you are the author of a fantastic children's book, we encourage you to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page. Scroll on down to be a guest, to find out how you can be a guest in the show, or find out about our Certified Great Read program. That is really a fantastic program that has helped so many authors. Our guest today has been Noa Baum. We want to thank her for being our guest. We want to wish her a happy birthday. We want to encourage you to check out How the Birds Became Friends. I also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Helen Frazier, Justina Thompson. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. We all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.